So I think we can start. Hello, everyone. Good morning from Europe. Welcome to our pre-IGF event, the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, Cyberstability Stocktaking of Norms and Institutional Dialogues. My name is Alexander Klimberg, and I am the director of the GCSC, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. And we hope this will unfold in three distinct phases. First, there will be a briefing from members of the GCSC on our final report, Advancing Cyberstability, which was launched nearly a year ago in Paris. Secondly, we are honored to receive briefings on some of the world's most important cyberstability initiatives directly from their respective chairs. And thirdly, I hope we can engage in a dialogue, both between the GCSC and the ambassadorial briefers and with you, the audience. If you would like to ask questions to the panelists, please use the friendly Q&A button in the middle of your Zoom application, usually in the center middle of the Zoom application. And we'll take questions both to the GCSC and to the ambassadorial briefers. With that, I'd like to introduce the briefers of the GCSC session. Latha Reddy is the co-chair of the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, and she's a former Deputy National Security Advisor of India. Abdul Hakim Adiola, unfortunately, has not been able to join us today. If he does so, he is the chair of the African Union Cybersecurity Expert Group and chair of the GFCE Working Group on Cyber Incident Management and Critical Infrastructure Protection. Khoo Boon Hui, Paul to his friends, was president of Interpol 2008 to 2012, as a senior fellow in the Civil Service College and Home Team Academy in Singapore. Frédérick Doucet is professor at the French Institute of Geopolitics at Paris 8 University and chairwoman of the Castille Chair of Cyber Strategy. And Christopher Painter is the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation and is the former coordinator of cyber issues in the US State Department. With that, I'd like to hand over to our co-chair of the GCSC, Latha Reddy. Latha, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Excellencies, fellow colleagues at the GCSC and friends. It's my honor to introduce our work at the GCSC. As you're aware, our report was released a year ago in November 2019. But as you're also aware, the need to combat the threats in cyberspace and the need to enhance international security and stability have never been greater. Through its work and through our final report, our Global Commission seeks to address these challenges and contribute to international efforts by developing proposals for norms and policies to enhance international security and stability of cyberspace by influencing responsible behavior by both state and non-state actors. The Commission brings in knowledge, expertise, and perspectives from the private sector and civil society, including the technical community and academia, into the traditional state-led dialogue of international peace and security in cyberspace. This is reflective of the multi-stakeholder reality of the space. Its composition, therefore, mirrors the stakeholders in the wider cyberspace environment. Our 28 commissioners and 4 advisors from all regions and backgrounds. Initiated by the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, which together with the East-West Institute constitute the GCSC Secretariat. In addition to the commission body itself, the GCSC was supported by a number of partners, including the governments of the Netherlands, Singapore, and France, as well as Microsoft, ISOC, affiliates, other sponsors and supporters, and a research advisory group that connects the GCSC to the academic community. I would now like to move on to the cyberstability framework and multi-stakeholder engagements. The cyberstability framework that we worked on, as you see from the diagram on the slide, over the last 3 years, we had the opportunity to develop our ideas and engage with a wide range of stakeholder group through our public hearings, meetings, and consultations, including online public requests for comments, peer reviews, commissioned research, and many other engagements. We've engaged with the Internet governance community at ICANN and IGF meetings, with the security community in the UNGGE, UNIDIR, and OEWG meetings, with the technical community at Black Hat and DEF CON, and with the rights community at RightsCon and the GCCS. We did not start our work in a vacuum. We are fully aware of that. Various groups had already identified possible norms and principles. These include the GGE, G20, G7, regional organizations, as well as non-state norms developed by Microsoft, Carnegie, and ISOC, to name just a few. We consider our proposals to be an addition to the existing ecosystem. Our report, Advancing Cyberstability, is the culmination of these discussions. The report was launched at last year's Paris Peace Forum by our chairs, the foreign ministers of the Netherlands and France, and the chief executive of the Cybersecurity Agency. What we proposed in this framework is the overarching structure of our report. This framework includes multi-stakeholder engagement, cyber-stability principles, the development and implementation of voluntary norms, adherence to international law, confidence-building measures, capacity building, the open promulgation and widespread use of technical standards. GCSC efforts have focused primarily on three of these items: the multi-stakeholder approach, principles, and norms. Other efforts and initiatives such as the GFCE and regional organizations address the other elements of the framework. Moving on to our multi-stakeholder engagement. While the idea of a multi-stakeholder approach has proven to be successful, it's not universally supported, as we all know. Some governments continue to believe that ensuring international security and stability is almost exclusively the responsibility of states. In practice, cyberspace is designed and operated primarily by the private sector and civil society. Governments are, despite their unique responsibilities, not the exclusive protectors of this domain. Even if governments maintain a de jure monopoly over the legitimate use of force in cyberspace, they no longer have a practical monopoly on attacking and protecting this domain, nor can they prevent the proliferation and use of powerful cyber weapons. Rather, the technical community, civil society, and individuals also play a major role in the protection of cyberspace, including the promulgation of standards. Therefore, developing successful cyberspace norms and policies and ensuring adherence to them requires participation by and is a responsibility of all stakeholders, and governments must focus on creating mechanisms that effectively incorporate participation of the private sector, the technical community, academia, and other representatives of civil society. To make progress, the GCSC believes that a concerted, global, multi-stakeholder effort is required. Even if states wish to go it alone, they cannot. Rather, the technical community, civil society, and individuals also play a major role in the protection of cyberspace. I'll stop here and hand it back to Alex.
Thank you, Latha. Next, Paul, please.
Yes, thank you, Latha and Alex, and good afternoon from Singapore. We started the paper because we had, by defining what cyber stability is, and on the screen you can see that it means that everyone can reasonably be confident in their ability to use cyberspace safely and securely, where the availability and the integrity of services and information provided in and through cyberspace are generally assured, where change is managed in relative peace, and where tensions are resolved in a non-escalatory manner. Well, I think what is different from most definitions is that ours is more nuanced in two ways. First, confidence and trust, and of course the perception thereof, in the systems we rely upon is a central component of the definition. If a system is unreliable or perceived that way, its use will be limited and the benefits of the technology lost. Second, while other definitions of stability often refer to a return to the original condition, our definition needs to take into account that cyberspace is a domain of constant change, requiring agile stability mechanisms. So simply put, everyone must remain confident in the availability and integrity of services and information provided in cyberspace, even as it and the world around it changes. And I think now in the COVID-19 situation, we see tremendous changes in not only the world, but also in cyberspace. I'll next move on to the principles. We came up with 4 principles. So one of the pillars of our cyber stability framework is the shared principles that can lead to deeper commitments. While not intended to be all-inclusive or cover every aspect of cyberspace policy, these principles underpin the cornerstones for norms of responsible behavior proposed by the Commission. So the first one, everyone is responsible for ensuring the stability of cyberspace. Well, this reaffirms the multi-stakeholder approach for all stakeholders to take reasonable efforts to ensure the stability of cyberspace. Second one, no state or non-state actor can take actions that impair the stability of cyberspace. This is consistent with the 2015 UN Group of Government Experts report and subsequent UN General Assembly resolutions, which prevent states from engaging in practices that are harmful or pose threats to international security. And we extend it to non-state actors as well. The third principle, state or non-state actors should take reasonable and appropriate steps to ensure the stability of cyberspace. This entails taking affirmative and cooperative steps to reduce the likelihood of inevitably escalating tensions or to reduce the risk of threats to stability. And last but not least, the fourth principle is efforts to ensure the stability of cyberspace must respect human rights and the rule of law. Due consideration should be given to the impact of certain activities on individuals' human rights, and actors should consider and minimize risk that their activities pose to individuals' enjoyment of their rights online as well as offline. Thank you. And I'd like to hand over the session to Alex, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Next, Frédérick, please.
Hello, everybody. So thank you, Paul. And we've seen that the principles were the key starting points for establishing policy and guiding tactical actions. But we believe that a commitment to norms can also significantly enhance cyber stability. And norms are important as an operational tool because they can help establish the predictability of state behavior. They also result from a consensus among states about what constitutes responsible behavior. And they can apply both to state and non-state actors. They can also be leveraged in order to call out irresponsible behavior by states. The first norm we chose to deal with is the public core, and it was our first priority because of the global reliance of on cyberspace of our economies, because also of the increasing dependence of other infrastructures on its reliability, and also because of the potentially dramatic consequences of this disruption. So the public norm to protect the public core of the internet, states and non-state actors should neither conduct nor knowingly allow activity that intentionally and substantially damages the general availability or integrity of the public core of the internet, and therefore the stability of cyberspace. And of course, defining the public core is challenging because many different types of attack may impair the general availability or integrity of the internet writ large. That said, there are some components that we believe constitute a critical internet infrastructure. And based on the large survey, we believe that these elements include packet routing and forwarding, for example, the internet exchange points, naming and numbering systems, DNS, DNSSEC, or WHOIS information, and also the cryptographic mechanisms of security and identity, as well as transmission media such as cable. The second norm we dealt with is the protection of the electoral infrastructures. It does advocate a prohibition on the disruption of elections through cyber attack on its technical infrastructure as an urgent norm that is critical in cyberspace, even though we've seen that there are many other different ways to disrupt election through cyberspace, but we focused on the stability of the system. The public core norm in particular has gained a lot of support within the European Union and the United Nations. It has been, to start with, embedded in European Union policy and law through the Cybersecurity Act, and that extends the mandate of ENISA to include the protection of the public core of the internet. And this norm has now become part of the European Union legislation. So there's a further need to explore the concept, its definition, and its end goal. The United Nations more recently as well, in the pre-draft report of the open-ended working group, has included the work of the Global Commission, and particularly the norm to protect the public core of the internet and the electoral infrastructure. So both of these norms are increasingly seen as enhanced interpretations of the existing GGE norm to protect critical infrastructure. So that reinforces the belief that often the best path to support the acceptance of existing norm is to agree on new add-on to reinforce existing ones. And in fact, norms, even though they are voluntary and non-binding, can lay the groundwork for more binding commitments or help interpret other norms and principles. The Commission issued 6 additional norms as part of its Singapore norm package. The third norm includes the widespread adoption and verified implementation of basic cyber hygiene. It's a regime of foundational protective measures, and they constitute basic duty of care that should be required of all users. The fourth norm prohibits the so-called hackback by non-state actors and reinforces the belief that states have a monopoly on the legitimate use of force that is strictly bound by international law, but states also have duties and responsibilities like the principle of due diligence. So we believe that offensive operations by non-state actor can result in serious disruption and damages, including for third parties, and are likely to trigger very complex legal disputes and escalate conflict. The Paris Calls for Trust and Security in Cyberspace refers to 5 of the GCSC norms, and it makes explicit reference to the norm to protect the public core, electoral infrastructure, and the hackback norm. So through the Paris Call, these norms have already gained the backing of over 1,000 like-minded states, companies, and civil society organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Frédérick. Next, Chris Painter, please. And can I request that if you are not speaking, please be sure that your audio is on mute. Thank you. Chris, over to you.
Thanks. And while the public core norm focused on the core of the internet, we also heavily rely on certain commercial products to reach the public core and leverage the connectivity that it provides. As a result, tampering with key components in software and hardware in their design will weaken the security and overall trust of products. So the first norm that's displayed here, our norm to avoid tampering, prohibits state and non-state actors to tamper with products in the development or production. Those in industry also have a responsibility to prevent such activities and should commit to a reasonable level of due diligence. One important thing that runs throughout our norms is that these apply both to states and to non-state actors, in this case, the private sector as well. The second norm against commandeering of ICT devices into botnets, while this norm focuses on the supply chain aspect, the one I just went, the norm against tampering, the norm against commandeering addresses already deployed devices. The compromise of such devices to install malicious software agents not only weakens the defense or infringes on the device's normal functioning, but also casts the owner or operator as potentially culpable for damages inflicted on the end target, or potentially falsely shifts blame to them. Next, the Commission recognizes the importance for states to create vulnerability equities processes, often referred to as VEPs, to assess whether and when to disclose not publicly known vulnerabilities. That process should be procedurally transparent, understanding that the actual decision sometimes cannot be completely transparent publicly, but must be procedurally transparent. Take into account the full range of views, meaning not just national security views, but other views within government that go to innovation and and how information is used, including network security, resiliency, the security of users and their data, law enforcement and national security, diplomatic and commercial implications. So really the full range of views, and having all of those inform a decision on vulnerability equities. Several states, such as the US, the UK, and Australia, have already shared their VEP processes, and we encourage others to do the same, especially as more and more states announce they have offensive cyber capabilities. So having a VEP process, I think, makes the entire ecosystem safer. The GCSC norms address, as I said, both state and non-state actors, and the last norm specifically urges IT developers and producers to adhere and to commit to a reasonable level of diligence in designing, developing, and delivering of products and services that prioritizes security and reduces vulnerabilities. It's a very important thing, prioritizing security and reducing vulnerability, not just getting the product to market, but taking those actions. And take measures to mitigate such vulnerabilities once they're discovered and they're deployed and they discover them later on. This responsibility also includes a duty to share information on vulnerabilities in a transparent process. So again, our obligations are both on states and non-state actors, including the private sectors. They have positive responsibilities, and they also have responsibilities to cooperate. In addition to the multilateral and multi-stakeholder support within the EU, the UN and Paris Call that Frédérick mentioned, we are seeing growing support from industry, most notably through the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, a public commitment of 144 global companies, which welcomed the GCSC norm package and made a specific reference to these norms. I should also note that, as Frédérick said, some of our norms, both the ones that Frédérick covered and that I covered, are articulations of existing GGE norms or UN norms, and others are new. And again, it's important that, unlike a lot of the ones that have come out of the UN so far, these apply both to state and non-state stakeholders. And the other thing I would note is that, particularly with respect to COVID and how that's affected and made it clear how vulnerable we are, but also how dependent we are on these systems, these norms are very important to protecting all of us. And finally, I should note, just because of my role as president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, just like with everything else, and it was mentioned as part of our framework, capacity building for all of these things is very important. With that, I'll turn it back over to Alex.
Thank you, Chris. And now we go to Latha for a wrap up and an outlook of how our work has been received.
Thank you, Alex. You've all heard the details of our report and the norms proposed. The question is, what do we do next? Let me begin by outlining the recommendations put forward in our report. As you can see, the Commission makes 6 recommendations which focus on strengthening the multi-stakeholder model, promoting norms adoption and implementation, and ensuring that those who violate norms are held accountable. The recommendations flow from the principles and seek to leverage the capabilities of state and non-state actors, in part through communities of interest. In short, we focus on what should be done and how it might be done. As you can see from the recommendations, the first is that state and non-state actors should adopt and implement norms, or must adopt and implement norms that increase the stability of cyberspace by promoting restraint and encouraging action. The second is that state and non-state actors, consistent with their responsibilities and limitations, must respond appropriately to norms violations, ensuring that those who violate norms face predictable and meaningful consequences. State and non-state actors, including international institutions, should increase efforts to train staff, build capacity and capabilities, promote a shared understanding of the importance of the stability of cyberspace, and take into account the disparate needs of different parties. The fourth is that state and non-state actors should collect, share, review, and publish information on norms violations and the impact of such activities. The fifth is that state and non-state actors should establish and support communities of interest to help ensure the stability of cyberspace. And finally, which is also very much a recommendation of the way forward, the GCSC recommends establishing a standing multi-stakeholder engagement mechanism to address stability issues, and which should be one where states, the private sector, including the technical community and civil society, are adequately involved and consulted. As you know, a Paris call of community of interest has also been established by the HCSS to further refine the concept of the public core, in the same way that Microsoft has done for election security. This community will seek ways to advance the implementation and monitoring of the principle as well as related norms. For those interested, a dedicated public core session will be taking place tomorrow within the context of the IGF, and we look forward to seeing you at that session. Finally, a few words on the way forward. Whilst the norms of the Commission have already had measurable success, the proposals in the report aim to complement the work of other organizations, while also serving to influence how critical actors can engage with one another and collaborate towards a consistent and stable cyberspace. The GCSC members will continue to advocate and engage with their respective communities. Inputs and feedback from these groups represented the bedrock of interactions within the wider community of state and non-state experts, and will form the basis of the advocacy of the report going forward. With this, we conclude the GCSC briefing session. I know we are all very keenly looking forward to the distinguished speakers who will be following and telling us about what's going on in the other important fora around the world. So thank you again, and I'll hand it back to Alexander.
Thank you very much, Latha. Thank you to all the speakers for the overview of the Advancing Cybersstability Report that was issued last year and which is available on our website. There have been a couple of questions on the chat function to the briefers that I would like to summarize, since they come from various individuals. But effectively, the question is, how impactful are norms going to be given that large, powerful states seem to care less and less about them? And what is the relevance of norms, in particular in the current pandemic environment? Does that reinforce them, or does that raise the question that we need more binding instruments to effectively achieve cyberstability? So Mike, that's the question to any of the panelists who wish to pick it up. Please feel free to take the floor.
Hey, Alex, maybe if I could, I'd like to start with that.
Sure, Chris.
Chris, yeah, two things I'd say. One, as I mentioned with respect to COVID, COVID has obviously been terrible for all of us. However, it does present one opportunity, which I think the fact that we have seen how dependent we are on the internet and how we see both state and non-state actors attacking health and other systems, it really, I think, helps frame a call of action to this area. One issue I think I've seen over the many years I've been doing this is that often these issues, although important to all of us on this call, don't get the kind of national and international policy importance they deserve. And so hopefully that this crisis can be used to really, I think, generate more action. And on the issue of states violating norms or even violating international law, that happens in the physical world as well as the cyber world. And what that means, and it goes back to one of our recommendations, is there needs to be accountability. There needs to be accountability and essentially consequences for bad actors who are breaking these norms, breaking these rules, both international law and the norms and rules of the road that we talked about. So there needs to be a better, arguably more communal or group effort among countries and other stakeholders to hold those who break them into account without itself being more escalatory. So that's something that I think is a recommendation. It's something that we all recognize.
Thank you, Chris. I see Frédérick as well. And if anyone else wants to answer, please raise your hand and I'll pick it up.
Yeah, it's just follow up, but Chris has already said a number of things I was going to say. But I think asking the question of whether norms are relevant is a little bit as asking the question of is international law worth it, because some states are not respecting it. And I think, of course, a lot of states are not going to respect these norms, but they help build a consensus about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And in the end, we believe that that can help enhance cybersecurity by collectively promoting good behavior. And I think that it also, that norms also help interpret existing obligations of international law, because this is such a new domain that the details of how to interpret international law are very important. And the fact that we propose these norms help interpret certain aspects of existing obligations, and they can help lay the groundwork as well for future obligations. But international law already applies to cyberspace, and I think our norms help precise some aspects of how it applies.
Thank you, Frédérick. Anyone else? Then we will, Latha?
Actually, sorry, before the chair speaks, maybe I can just add a little bit from our perspective. This is Gaurav here from Singapore. Yeah, so actually at the grand level, small countries like Singapore really depend on a multilateral rules-based order. We are optimistic about it. We know that the norms are relatively new. They're quite young. It takes time for us to understand and implement these norms across regions. And even big countries have slightly differing interpretations of what these norms mean. We remain optimistic, but we're also realistic. And we're realistic that it takes a lot of hard work and effort to get to a point where these norms become something that all countries understand, implement in a similar fashion, and to some extent possibly even have some teeth. And I think there are many conversations happening across the OEWG and the GGE, which Singapore's happy to be a part of, along those tracks. I would also like to add that while there is a little bit of disagreement on the margins, our perspective remains that 80% of the norms, or at least on 80% of the issues of these norms, most countries agree. there remains a 20% that will continue to require more discussion, more debate, and a lot more clarity. And I think that part should not distract us from the fact that we've come so far. And 2015's norms are a very important position for us to start the conversation from. If I can add just one other texture to this whole conversation, there's this grand strategy level of norms that we're discussing. But once you get down into the details, there's also very tactical issues, very technical norms, which don't require big countries to have grand political positions on, but just require companies to work together on. If I could share an example from Singapore, we've just introduced what we call the Cybersecurity Labeling Scheme. It's basically like a nutrition sticker for IoT devices. When you buy a webcam or a Wi-Fi printer or a router today, actually consumers have no idea how good the security in that device is. And that scaled up to a botnet attack can actually be a problem at the national level. So we just basically implemented a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star sticker rating on the side of these boxes, which gives consumers a broad sense of how secure these devices are, and then they can make an informed consumer choice. This does not require grand political agreements. Actually, once we start to implement this across more countries, you can already see the baseline of security for IoT devices, something that Chris spoke about, starting to move up. And these are the kind of technical, tactical decisions that we can make as countries, and we can work together as countries, regardless of how the big challenges, that 20% remains in discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav, and thank you for also helping to kick off the second part of our session. As it is obvious, the GCSC did not work in a vacuum. Our entire existence was based upon the desire to be able to put multi-stakeholder input to the many government-led cyberstability initiatives. We are therefore very honored to have a high-level group of expert briefers from those key cyberstability initiatives to help provide an overview of where we are with those initiatives and cyberstability overall. So our speakers include Ambassador Guilherme Patriota from Brazil, who's chair of the UN Group of Governmental Experts, Ambassador Jürg Lauber from Switzerland, chair of the UN Open-Ended Working Group, Ambassador Heli Tiirmaa Klaar from Estonia, Ambassador at Large for Cyber Diplomacy, and head of champion of the Working Group 4 of the UN Secretary General's High Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, and Ambassador Regina Greenberger from Germany, one of the champions of Working Group 5 of the UN Secretary General's High Level Panel on Digital Cooperation. We were also to be joined by Mr. Paul Zayach, who is head of Strategic Affairs and Cybersecurity Department, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France, to help provide an update on the Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace, but unfortunately, we just received an email that he has an emergency and won't be able to attend. So perhaps, Frédérick, you might want to jump in a little bit later if you feel able to and comment on where the Paris call is. Otherwise, perhaps some of the other governmental speakers can update us. And finally we have Mr. Gaurav Keerthi, the Deputy Executive of the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, who's standing in for the Chief Executive, David Koh, who was kind enough to send us a video that we will also run to help explain the new Singaporean norms implementation checklist. For that, I would like to go to Ambassador Patriota, chair of the GGE, to provide the first expert briefing. Ambassador, the chair is yours.
Yes, hello. I hope that you can, not sure if you can see me. Now you can, there you go. Yes, well, very honored to be here, to have been invited to participate. It's always a pleasure to see members of the cybersecurity community. In this case, I think we have the most knowledgeable and capable ones with us. And I think the Global Commission does perform it has a leading role, I think, in the elaboration of norms, which is the subject matter of greatest interest in the group that I chair. So I'm the chair of the Group of Governmental Experts. As you know, it's the 6th such group. We've been doing this for many years now, and we are not starting from zero. We have had 5 previous iteration of GGEs within the UN umbrella. It's actually the General Assembly umbrella. And 3 of them adopted reports by consensus that were subsequently endorsed by the General Assembly. So this is what I have called the acquis of GGEs in the cybersecurity domain. And I think it's a very valuable acquis in this initial exchange that I was listening to. Several of you have mentioned the norms from the 2015 report as a basis for many of the activities that you are carrying forward regionally in terms of implementing the norms, or the norms as a basis for your confidence building measures, or the norms as a basis for additional norms, or deepening the norms regionally, or establishing additional directives as in Europe, for example. So I think the norms have a powerful effect. I'm a believer in the norms, even if they're not embedded in an international treaty that would be legally binding on states. I think the fact that they reflect a consensus of all states in the end, because they were endorsed by the General Assembly, they have a trickle-down effect that's very powerful. And I think they establish a point of reference for the whole international community in terms of how to deal with the challenges of this new environment, which is, well, it started off mostly unregulated. So we have to take decisions. Countries have to decide how they wish to introduce some sort of order into the cyberspace. The GGE works under a first committee mandate. So we are addressing cybersecurity from the peace and security perspective. So issues of cybersecurity that are relevant for the coexistence of states or the avoidance of conflicts between or among states. So that's the lens under which we are looking at this issue. We're not looking at every single concern about cybersecurity, but just that part of it, the one that is relevant for the relationship in between or among states. We have started to work in 2019. As you know, now we have 2 processes. I see Ambassador Lauber with us today, my good friend and the chair of the parallel process of the OEWG. We've tried from the beginning to maintain close and very cooperative relationship to ensure the processes are mutually supportive, that they do not collide or they do not generate outcomes that would be inconsistent with each other. So we're working on that, I think, very closely. And the first step we took under this GGE was to consult with regions as per the mandate. So this time the mandate has this element. It's there, it's clearly stated. So we must consult with the regions. And we already held 5 such consultations. We did it with the OSCE, we did it with the EU. We had Asian Forum meetings. We did it with the OAS in the Americas and with the African Union. We might do a couple more depending on how the pandemic, whether or not it allows us to do additional sessions. So these regional meetings allowed us to expand our baseline for obtaining inputs and opinions as what we can do. Some members always point to the fact that GGEs have a limited membership of 25 designated experts by governments. But this time around, through the consultations, we have expanded considerably beyond the 25 experts. So, you know, I've taken on board a lot of inputs and contributions from these regions that I have mentioned to you. Ambassador Lauber joined me in all these sessions, so both chairs were there. And we had very positive exchanges. Then I had also meetings, an informal consultation meeting with the full membership of the UN last December. So that allowed non-members of the GGE to express their views as well under a more typically political setting of the UN. They could make statements, they could put forth some written papers. So there was an opening there for the full membership to express their views so that the GGE could take that into account. I mean, there's an effort here to be a bit more open, but the GGE being only 25 and experts working in their personal capacity, we can I think, discuss issues in a more detailed manner and perhaps slightly more technical manner than other types of settings would allow. So we're not based on the typical sort of political statement by countries. You know, they have 5 minutes to make their statements. We actually can have very dynamic sessions that are closed. They're not open to the public. This also allows countries to test the limits of each other's positions a bit more. So perhaps that allows, there's less transparency, but it opens up, I think, the field for testing the limits of convergence and consensus building in respect to new challenging concepts that we may wish to move in a positive direction multilaterally. So that's one of the benefits, I think, of the GGE. We've gone through a first session analyzing, again, the mandate and the acquis, what's the relevance of what was done before. And I think that was important because it got everyone up to the same level, because some members have been in this process for many years, others just arrived. So we had to sort of equalize a bit the level of information and knowledge. And we came to the conclusion that the acquis is very valuable, that we don't want to reopen it. We don't want to undermine it. And I think that was a great first step. So, you know, everything that we're gonna do will respect the acquis. And what can we do that is valuable in addition to the acquis is to add to it a new layer of common understanding. So you may think that's not much. I think that would be a lot if we manage to pull this off. Of course, it requires delicate and sensitive drafting of additional language. How can we do that? One thing is we've looked at the norms and the confidence building measures. I think those are two segments of previous report that we might be able to build upon quite in a more detailed fashion. We can bring, I think, more value added addition to the acquis there in those two segments. We can provide a comment on each norm. So we can frame norms in a slightly more detailed manner. When you do that, you're kind of making the norm slightly more understandable and clearer. You're deepening your understanding on each of the norms. And then you can also provide some inputs as to how to implement the norms or what kind of structures nationally, regionally, internationally you may wish to build or develop to better implement the norms. And you can do the same thing with the confidence building measures, expand on the existing one, and also provide additional more detailed comments as to how to work on those confidence building measures so that everyone understands them the same way, everyone works on the same page. There's a harmonization effect here. One component, we have looked at norms that have been recommended by the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. So I think here you're being very much respected as a producer of new concepts and ideas. And I think the norms, the recommendations you have put forward, some of them have been seriously considered. Whether or not at the end we will have, a consensus outcome that would be able to integrate some of those ideas coming from the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise or not, that's something that remains to be seen, and we will only know it when we reach the end of our mission, let's say, next year. But we are considering some of those. I think I could mention two references, for example, the issue of protecting electoral processes and referenda and plebiscites. The other one is critical infrastructure that is essential or relevant for public interest. There are different ways that you can sort of phrase this. So we are all, that's also on the table in the discussion. I cannot prejudge, what's the kind of agreement we can reach on those things. But I think the group is looking at it. These things come up. Other sensitive and very up-to-date and current affairs issue, for example, the integrity of supply chains, something that we read about on newspapers every day, very delicate, very much a central element of today's international affairs discussion that we'll see what we can do on that front. Then we have some delicate issues. The international law discussion is very complicated because international law is legally binding. It represents obligations for states. So what additional comments or understandings can we provide in terms of the application of international law to cyberspace, in addition to the fact that they apply? I think we can understand that in the acquis, we've come to the conclusion and we've declared that international law does apply to cyberspace, including the Charter of the UN in its entirety. Can we say additional things? We might. In any case, the mandate has included the idea of annexes that would contain some national views of experts and others that could be appended to the report. So that could also provide an additional contribution. We're not just reliant on an agreement among the 25s within the GGE to be submitted through the Secretary General to the first committee. We could have also those annexes with some views that are individual. And then confidence building, it's a promising area. And I think there's a lot of regions, many regions are working on this. So it fits in nicely with some regional agendas. And also national initiatives. And then another area which has gained a lot of traction and a lot of potential is the international cooperation and capacity building sort of part of the work. There's a lot of interest. A lot of countries would like to see more robust mechanisms and a stronger effort from states that are more capable than others in supporting them to implement the norms and protect their cyberspace accordingly in a manner that would be, in accordance with the responsible behavior of states that we're all trying to encourage. So right now I'm positive, but as you know, agreements are not dependent only on the drafting or the quality of the chair or there's a global circumstance. I think what happens with the OEWG could have a bearing as well. We're kind of tied at the hip because we are both of us rely on consensus to achieve an outcome, and consensus sometimes not the easiest thing to achieve. But at this point, I would end just to indicating that we're moving forward. We've had 2 formal sessions, 1 virtual session, and we're going to have another virtual session in December. And we're trying to have 2 formal sessions now. They're going to have to be moved to April and May of next year because of the pandemic. But the pandemic has not stopped us from working because the virtual sessions have been very, very productive. They're week-long virtual sessions. We can actually go through lengthy texts during these discussions. Yep. And I think the first full outline of what might become a report of the GGE has recently been shared with the experts. So next time we meet virtually, we will have a complete outline of a pre-draft that we can sort of dedicate our attention to. And hopefully, I can only hope we can survive this next round.
Great.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Sorry for speaking for so long.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Patriota. Thank you for touching on a number of topics that I hope we can return to on questions if we have time. We only have another 30 minutes of our session, so that might be tight, but we'll do our best. But as you referenced, Open-Ended Working Group plays a key role in these deliberations, so I'd like to turn to Ambassador Lauber for chair of the OEWG. Ambassador?
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to the members of the Global Commission and the Hague Center for Strategic Studies for their invitation and this opportunity to provide you with a short update on the status of work in the Open-Ended Working Group. Mostly, though, thanks for this opportunity to see you all, many familiar faces, in particular my friend and colleague, Ambassador Patriota. We are in Geneva going again through difficult circumstances, so it's really nice at least to be able to connect through this. As Ambassador Patriota said, we're talking to the brightest and the best informed people on these processes this morning, so I don't want to go too much into the history. We are all aware, or you are all aware, that we have these 2 processes, as my colleague just mentioned. Both of them were established in first committee in December 2018. Their agendas are very similar. We have one more agenda point, discussion on regular institutional dialogue. I think what's important to keep reminding us is that in substance we are very similar, meaning also not just the agendas are very similar, but the open-ended working group, although this is new, the format is new, this open-ended format is new, but we're not, as the GGE, we're not starting at zero. We're starting off, of course, based on all the work that has been done by previous rounds of GGEs on almost all the issues on our agenda. And I think member states are very aware of that. We are not starting at zero was very much the theme almost of the first substantive session that we had. Which brings me to the status of the process. We had so far 2 of our 3 mandated substantive sessions. The first in September 19, the second one in February of this year. We had a very good intersessional stakeholder meeting in December 19, which was chaired by David Khoo from Singapore. Thanks again for the great work there. And in all of these meetings, physical meetings, in our 2 substantive and then the intersessionals, I think we all of us were impressed by the level of participation, the numbers that were there, participants from all over the world, many delegations, even in the intersessional, in the stakeholder meeting, but also the substance of the discussion, clearly showing that all governments around the world now are aware of this is an issue. They have an interest in this. They want to participate in the discussion. They want to be there. I also participated in the regional consultations, thanks to the invitation by Ambassador Patriota. This was very useful for me. First of all, of course, to learn more about the regional perspectives on the issues, but then also it gave me and him, I think, the opportunity to exchange with each other and to get to know each other also, which will be helpful in the course of the work of these 2 processes. Now, as for everybody else, the COVID-19 pandemic means that, or meant and still means that we had to adapt our work plan. We had originally planned to have intersessional meetings on what I called the pre-draft, a document that I sent out in March based on the discussions we had in the substantive sessions and in the stakeholder meeting. It was not possible to have these intersessional meetings in New York as planned. It was also not possible to have the 3rd substantive session in July, which is why this process is still ongoing. It was originally planned to conclude with this meeting in July in New York. Instead, what we did, we switched also to the virtual format. We had 2 rounds of virtual meetings in June and in September. Again, we saw a very large number of participants. We tried to find a window that works for almost everybody, although some people had to get up very early and some had to stay up very late. But we had over 140 member states participating in these virtual discussions. So far, we had exchanges again on the issue of existing and potential threats, on the rules, norms, and principles, on application of international law. These were the issues we covered so far in the 2 rounds. What was clear in these discussions that member states felt very strongly about these processes to have to go on in spite of the obstacles through COVID, because precisely now, particularly now, since we've seen all the constraints in this pandemic, the issue of cybersecurity has become even more important. We've seen increased vulnerabilities due to increased use of ICTs during this pandemic. And we've also seen increased malicious cyber activities, in particular against medical facilities and research institutions. The virtual exchanges were positive in the sense that they allowed us to continue the dynamic we have developed through the traditional meetings in September and in February. But of course, it's not, as we all know by now, there are limits. You can't really drill down into the depth on the discussions, especially on issues that are still complicated, that are sensitive. So we are planning to have the third substantive meeting so far physical in presence in March, from 8 to 12 March in New York. And between now and then, we will have 2 more rounds of virtual discussions on CBMs and capacity building, and the last one on regular institutional dialogue. So this is just a short update on where we are with the process. As much as I'd like to, but I don't think I'm able at this point to tell where the landing point of our report is. The discussions are ongoing, particularly, or not only, but also with regard to norms. There are a variety of views. There are those who would like to concentrate on the better implementation of existing norms. There are those who think we need to look at new norms. And in this context, the Commission, of course, the work of the Commission was very helpful, as in the GGE, Ambassador Patriota just mentioned it. Also in our process, in our group, there were numerous references by member states to the work, to the report of the Global Commission. And it really helps the discussion. It really brings substance to our discussion. So I take this opportunity also to thank you very much for that. This is just briefly an update on our process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lauber. Thank you for those kind words. And we have noted in our chat already that there's been quite a bit of interest in the plan of action that has been proposed within the open-ended working group. Perhaps we can return and discuss aspects of that proposal later on in questions, or perhaps our French colleague will be able to provide some insight on what the uptake of the French-Egyptian plan of action has been within the open-ended working group. Beforehand, I'd like to turn to another initiative also located within the UN, but not the UN First Committee. The UN Secretary General's High Level Panel on Digital Cooperation spawned a number of working groups, plus its own roadmap to further develop suggestions on digital cooperation. And we're lucky to have two working groups champions with us today. First is Ambassador Heli Klaar, who is one of the champions for Working Group 4 of the High Level Panel on Digital Cooperation. So over to you, Heli.
Thank you, Alex, and hello to everybody who are on the panel. So it's good to see all this professional community together in this event, and thank you, Alex, to put it together. So on this high-level panel, Estonia has been pretty active since the very beginning of the high-level panel. Our former foreign minister, Ambassador Marina Kaljurand, was part of the group who wrote in this report. And we continued our engagement within the Trust and Security recommendation, which is the recommendation 4. The whole high-level panel process consists of the 8 working groups, and each working group is dealing with each recommendation. As you might know, we have the 8, I think, recommendations there, so there are 8 working groups respectively. In addition to the Trust and Security and IGF Plus working groups, we also have working groups on AI, working groups on human rights and digital domain, and some others. And each of those working groups has its own constituents and its own stakeholder community. I think the constituents were broadly collected from the wider multi-stakeholder basis, and there are many think tanks and many universities and many companies also involved in this high-level panel process implementation. So this is definitely very multi-stakeholder by its nature. Although we know that there are also the governments which are active there. And I think in our trust and security recommendation, we have a global company as one of the champions. So in this trust and security recommendation, we have 5 champions co-chairing this initiative. But let me now go into this trust and security issue because our panel is about cyberstability. When we embarked our work on implementing the recommendation 4, before going forward with our implementation and recommendation for the UN Secretary General roadmap, which was released in June this year, Estonia has launched a mapping exercise asking our constituents and stakeholders what kind of action items and what kind of way forward they were proposing for this trust and security activities. And our mapping study was conducted, which came up with several conclusions. First conclusion was that there are already many initiatives, both intergovernmental and also multi-stakeholder, civil society initiatives, the private sector initiatives, and we listed 50 plus already ongoing digital trust and security or cybersecurity, either working groups or initiatives globally. Of course, we did not list each and every initiative, just most important of them, or the ones that had come to our attention via the stakeholders in this high-level panel process. So, and this allowed us to conclude that maybe we should have the more comprehensive overview of the existing initiatives, and also the better understanding what these existing initiatives already are contributing to trust and security globally, and we also could note that there is very little coordination sometimes between those different initiatives. It is, of course, natural that the governmental world is more in its own bubble, so to say, and the multi-stakeholder community is gathering at different events and different venues, but it was quite visible that sometimes we also had overlapping initiatives on several issues. So the coordination between the already existing initiatives seems to be still one of the areas where we could see maybe more effective approach. And of course, what came out from the mapping study and from the responses of all our stakeholders was that most of our stakeholders wanted to see a very strong link between digital trust and achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And basically, something what we call in the diplomatic world, the capacity building, the cyber capacity building was something which came out from many responses that we had gathered. So this allowed us to propose to Secretary General that there are certain key principles and key objectives that most of the stakeholders would like to see in furthering the trust and security issue globally. We could then articulate those principles and objectives as following. First, the principle that came out from most of our responses was that digital technologies must advance the Sustainable Development Goals and narrow digital divide, also the trust and security, in the sense of trust and security. There is an urgent need for increased awareness, enhanced cooperation, and strengthened capacity building. And in particular, we should pay attention to the challenges faced by marginalized or disadvantaged groups to commit their support or support their access to information and also trustworthy possibilities to access information. It was discussed between the stakeholders that we could look into the capacity building efforts. For instance, making sure that there is a technical cert in each country, and also the corresponding policy measures in place that would help to safeguard the digital trust and security, which is also foundational when we talk about sustainable development in digital domain. Then one of the principles that, of course, was quite generic was that the digital domain, first and foremost, is promoting social and economic progress for all, and that human rights and fundamental freedom should be protected online. I think all the high-level panel recommendations were coming up with this kind of principle. More specific to trust and security, we found out that we also would need to look into the fact that the digital development from its deployment to usage in practice should have a more stable technological ground, meaning that security by design and all the advancements that we have in digital technology could be advocated and strengthened. And this also will, of course, mean that the private sector, which is producing the digital technology, has a very significant role there. And one of the major principles for us was also that digital cooperation is most of all multi-stakeholder. And we have to make sure that our recommendation 4 on trust and security will be operating on the multi-stakeholder basis, where all the actors share the same responsibilities to improve trust, security, and stability in digital environment. And it is now our understanding that the implementation of the Secretary General Roadmap, which was adopted in June, will take the path of a broad multi-stakeholder engagement and capacity building in terms of achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we were just discussing between all the champions last week whether we can operationalize a bit more of our goals and also reach out to a larger group of the stakeholders and maybe also propose something practical in terms of capacity building. So we are now discussing with different champions and stakeholders what kind of activities we could undertake so that we our trust and security recommendation will be also having more impact and providing more stability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heli, for that overview of the work of your working group. I'd like to go next to Ambassador Regine Greenberger, who is one of the champions for Working Group 5 of the UN Secretary General's High Level Panel on Digital Cooperation. We have extended our session by 5 minutes, so we have another 20 minutes before we have to conclude. And it would be great if we can do one round of questions when the briefers are finished. We've had a couple of interesting questions, and I think we should give the audience a chance to pose them. Please, Ambassador Greenberger, the floor is yours. Ambassador Greenberger, you're muted at the moment. Ambassador Greenberger, if you hear me, can you just raise your hand for a second? Do you hear me? Yeah, you're still muted at the moment. Ambassador Greenberger, please unmute. There we go. No, we still don't hear you at the moment. Nope, unfortunately, we still don't hear you. Okay, what, Ambassador Greenberger, we cannot hear you at the moment. We will go next to Mr. Paul Zajac, but we will come back to you in 5 minutes. So we hope to hear from you then. So I'd like to go next to Romain Rideau, who is a deputy of Paul Zajac, himself the head of Strategic Affairs and Cybersecurity Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France, and ask for some quick comments on the Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace. And hopefully we can return to some questions on the plan of action for the OEWG afterwards. But first, some comments on the Paris call. Romain, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and I hope you can all hear me well. Thank you very much for inviting France. I'm sorry that Paul cannot be there today, but he was just called for an emergency, so I will do my best to replace him. So it is a pleasure to discuss with all of you, with so many experts and colleagues who I know share the same conviction that we have, that a multi-stakeholder approach is essential to advance the international cybersecurity agenda, and with it to improve the global cybersecurity level. So as you all know, the multi-stakeholder approach is at the center of the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace that France and President Macron launched in November 2018 during the Paris Peace Forum. And as you know, this call is based on a few key principles, such as the application of human rights and international law in cyberspace, or the responsibility of private actors. So the Paris Call has now become the largest multi-stakeholder initiative on cybersecurity in the world. It gathers today more than 1,100 supporters, including 79 states, more than 650 private sector actors, and more than 350 civil society organizations from all around the world. So we saw the number of supporters double in 1 year after the launch of the call, which is a great success, and we should continue to make this community growth bigger and bigger. What is important to note is that the Paris Call serves as an umbrella initiative that does not aim to replace current negotiations at the United Nations or in other fora, but rather to bring light to certain key principles and values and to give a voice to the multi-stakeholder community. So indeed, France believes that all actors, be they public, private, or from civil society, have a role to play in cyberspace and can participate in the development of solutions to increase trust and security. The Paris Call was conceived as a diplomatic initiative in the first place, but now it is much more. Indeed, supporters of the Paris Call have started to launch and implement their own actions and projects to give a reality and a materiality to the principles of the call at that level. And I believe it is very important to stress this self-appropriation by the different supporters. So we believe that the strengths of the Paris Call community should serve as a lever to advance international norm, but also to cooperate on concrete initiatives. And in this spirit, we expect to launch a series of working groups starting in next January to further engage the community, promote international law, and build concrete tools. And we've received many expressions of interest so far from the supporters of the call, which is very positive. And so you will know a bit more about all of this in 2 weeks now, because we will make some announcements, hopefully during the Paris Peace Forum on the 12th and 13th of November. I would also like to make a link here with the UN process, and I thank Ambassadors Patriota and Lauber for the remarkable intervention, and more broadly for the remarkable chairmanship of those two processes. So the collaborative open approach and the principles of the Paris Call are at the heart of our new proposals to continue the UN negotiations on cybersecurity following the GGE and the OEWG. We and many countries, as you know, have indeed proposed to launch a program of action at the United Nations. And this initiative for a POA is now supported by France and 45 countries, which is a great success, and we hope to bring even more supporters to this initiative. And I would like to note here that this is a broad and diverse support, geographically speaking, which makes it, I think, even more legitimate. So this POA It would allow us to cover all the issues that we work today on at the UN, norms, the evolution of technologies, cooperation, but it would also offer, I think, a long-lasting solution that is flexible, result-oriented, and open to all other stakeholders. So by the end of the year, we'll have informal consultation in the OEWG on what could be a regular institutional dialogue under the auspices of the UN. And I believe it will be the right time to discuss and exchange with other states and show that these POA proposals can be a true consensus and constructive option. And we will also start to work on the roadmap and options for the POA with the other sponsoring countries, and we'll of course keep you updated. So we continue to support and to promote this approach and advance together the principles of a free, open, unique, and secure internet. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Romain. I'd like to turn briefly to Ambassador Lauber because he has to leave at 11, and we will be able to continue this session to 11:10. But there were some questions posed to us and on the chat that I would like to pass on. They can be summarized to effectively, how can the OEWG benefit more from the multi-stakeholder engagement that, for instance, we witnessed under the Singaporean interim chairmanship going forward, and what are the prospects of that happening if the OEWG mandate is extended, in your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't really speak to the last point, but the current process, we've learned a lot and profited a lot from contributions from the Global Commission, but from other stakeholders as well. As I pointed out, we had the dedicated meeting last December, but there is a constant exchange, and civil society stakeholders still have the possibility to send in their contributions to the Secretariat, and we put them on the website of the Open-Ended Working Group for all the members of the group, for all the governments to look at them, to learn from them, and to bring it back into the discussion of the group. Right now, with the virtual format, it's a bit complicated because according to the rules of the UN, these are informal, so only open to governments. But as I said, there are other formats to submit proposals, to exchange with governmental delegations. I'll be very happy to use opportunities like the one you provided today to exchange with civil society, with stakeholders, and will continue to do so until my mandate, the mandate of this working group, is finished.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lauber. Next, Ambassador Greenberger. Since we have video, I hope you can hear us. You won't be able to join. Okay, so then we will then continue for the moment, unless Ambassador Greenberger. Fortunately, we still don't hear you. Unfortunately, sorry about that. Okay, well then we'll turn to our next speaker. We'll give it another try, maybe in 10 minutes. I'd like to ask Luke to play the video from David Koh, Chief Executive of the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good evening if you are like me, dialing in from Asia. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore to share on the work that we have been doing, particularly on the implementation checklists that we are developing in collaboration with the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs, UNODA. Let me begin by making the observation that this year's IGF, like many other international events that used to be held physically, has gone fully online because of the pandemic. This allows many participants to attend and log on from different parts of the world in the comfort of their own homes and offices. During these challenging times, the need for everyone to come together, whether at the global or regional level, is essential. The use of technology enables us to pull together people from all over the world. We saw this also at the recently concluded Singapore International Cyber Week, SICW, which was held in a hybrid format involving both physical and online events on the first week of October. This year's iteration of SICW brought together close to 6,000 participants from 60 countries. This allowed for even richer discussions on a broad range of topics from cybersecurity, data security, to AI, as well as addressing issues like disinformation and misinformation. Singapore's Minister in charge of Cybersecurity, Mr. S. Iswaran, announced an initiative to develop a norms implementation checklist under the auspices of our ongoing UN Singapore Cyber Program, UNSCP, where Singapore partners with UNODA. This initiative to develop a norms implementation checklist will build on something similar that the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, had previously done. ASEAN views cybersecurity as a key enabler of our smart nation and digital economy efforts. Without cybersecurity, we would not have a trusted and reliable digital space for us to reap the full benefits of digitalization or be able to power the digital economy. ASEAN has been making steady progress on cybersecurity cooperation. In 2018, ASEAN became the first regional grouping to subscribe in principle to the 11 norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace from the 2015 UN GGE Consensus Report. In 2019, the ASEAN Ministerial Conference on Cybersecurity, the AMCC, developed a norms chart as part of the Norms Awareness Workshop conducted under the UNSCP. ASEAN remains committed to stability in cyberspace. ASEAN member states represent a wide diversity of economic and technical development, so catering to these diverse needs is a challenge. But we are happy to share our experiences with the wider community of nations. Together with UNODA, Singapore will work with partners in the ASEAN region and other developing states to refine the AMCC norms chart to make it more applicable to a wider range of UN member states. The checklist will constitute a simple guide for a set of actions, such as identifying national capacities and structures that countries can introduce in order to implement the 11 norms. Singapore will be convening workshops or focus group discussions involving a wide range of developing countries in order to solicit feedback to formulate the norms implementation checklists. We will also identify suitable trainers to deliver the training, including suitable third-party non-government partners where appropriate. The training will be done at the ASEAN Singapore Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, where we will conduct modular-based workshops with different workshops focusing on different groups of norms. For example, policy norms, technical norms, or operational norms. We will start off with the first few workshops exploring technical norms. I hope that I've given you a glimpse of what to expect for Singapore's initiative on the norms implementation checklist, and we will be announcing more details in due course. I would like to conclude by reiterating that cybersecurity is a key enabler for digitalization and the digital economy. As we become even more dependent on the digital domain, we need to uphold a rules-based multilateral order in cyberspace for greater stability and resilience. It is with this in mind that we hope that the norms implementation checklist, once it is ready, will support countries to implement the UN GGE norms, enabling a rules-based, stable, secure, and interoperable cyberspace. This, in turn, will be a key enabler of economic progress and the betterment of our lives in the digital age. Thank you.
So thank you very much to the Cybersecurity Agency for that video. I'm sure if there are any questions, we can follow up directly. But I would like to take the last opportunity, the last chance to go to Ambassador Greenberger, whose working group 5 dealt with IGF Plus and some of the most exciting developments for the Internet Governance Forum. Is it Ambassador Greenberger? Do you? Unfortunately, we still do not hear you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I think this is particularly unfortunate, as the Working Group 5, of course, as many of you know, dealt with key issues within the current IGF discussion on how to expand the IGF, in particular with additional reforms within the context of incubation policy incubator and for instance help desk and similar initiatives. If somebody would like to raise that point on behalf of Ambassador Greenberger, please do so. Otherwise, I would like to use the last 5 minutes that we have just to pose a general question to any of the panelists, which is simply the following. Some of the conversation has revolved around norms specifically, and some around the implementation of norms. And the question is, how much more important is it to implement the nature of a norm rather than the verbatim word of a norm? Is it more important that, for instance, that a nature of a norm is adopted rather than the norm specifically is adopted? Or is it more important to concentrate, as it is, on the 11 norms that we have right now, keep to those norms and the current definition, and not expand that definition too much, but rather work on them and their implementation going forward? So if there are any views from any of the panelists, including from the GCSC, be great to hear them. I think it's a rather open-ended question, but the question is simply, is that do more norms have to be constituted as an individual norm, or can they be constituted as a reinforcement of existing norms? If you have if you'd like to take the stage, just please raise your hand or speak up. Chris, I'm sure you have Ambassador Patriota, and then Latha, and then Chris. Okay, Ambassador Patriota, please.
Okay, thank you. Can't say too much, but I must, I'm intrigued by your question. I think in my case, I'm hoping that we build upon the norms and we do not contradict the norms. I think we need to have deeper common understanding regarding the value of the norms, what they represent, and what they're trying to achieve, because they are written, or they were drafted in quite minimal terms. So it's not clear to all countries. You know, we're talking about states. For example, how do you take some caution when you're trying to attribute an incident, for example, to attribute to someone an incident in cybersecurity? So if you have additional elements that would allow countries to be more in agreement as to how this is meant to be applied, I think it would be positive. So I think you have to work on the basis of the existing norms. You cannot ignore them and start over again. I think that would be very detrimental to what we're trying to achieve. But I think, you know, additional clarity on the existing norms, I think there's room for that. That would be, I think, of great value. It would be an important step forward in trying to join people. You know, we're trying to increase the level of common understanding and cooperation. You cannot cooperate if each one interprets the norms whatever way they wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Patriota. Latha?
I just wanted to say very briefly, you know, that what we did in the GCSC with our norms, you know, to add explanatory notes for each norm, which is part of our report, I think is the way to go. And in a way, it complements what Ambassador Patriota was saying, that you don't alter the wording of the norm or the definition of the norm. You simply add to the interpretation of the norm by attaching an explanatory note. I think, to my mind, that's a good way to go. Thank you.
Latha. And Chris, the final word is yours.
Well, I was just going to agree with Latha and say that I think it's probably politically easier to get use these as articulation of existing norms, especially the public core norm and others, existing norms being the critical infrastructure norm. So the more we can do that, the better. There are some norms that are directed to other stakeholders other than governments, and I think we can make progress in that arena as well. And this idea of implementation, I think, is critically important, because as much as we understand the norms, and even some countries have signed on to them, I don't think they've really reached the wide level of acceptance, even the ones from the GGE, in terms of understanding and implementing. So Singapore's initiative, I think, is quite good. But I think we also need to make sure we really put efforts into capacity building and awareness for both the existing GGE norms and interpretations of them.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I've received notes from the moderators that we need to conclude our session. That's clear. We can go on most of the day, but indeed time is limited. Please note, if you would like to do more on this topic tomorrow, we have a second session with GCSC commissioners. This one dedicated to the public core. That will include individuals like Vince Cerf, Jeff Moss, Marie Chishaka, and others. And it'll be around the same time as the session was today. In the meantime, my thanks to the GCSC commissioners and especially our ambassadorial briefers for their time and for joining us. And thank you to the audience. Let's keep the discussion going. So thank you very much and goodbye. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.